Every parent's worst nightmare is losing their child. For Samuel Creek, that nightmare became reality 3 years ago when his daughter died searching for a lost little girl in the Montana wilderness. Now that same child has disappeared again, and Samuel finds her wandering alone through the snow-covered mountains. Most folks would simply take her to safety, but this rescue will force Samuel to walk the exact path where his daughter took her final breath. The journey home means facing wild animals, brutal weather, and dangerous men who don't want the girl found. As Samuel struggles to protect this child, he must confront the guilt that's been eating at him for years. Can a broken man find redemption by saving the life his daughter died trying to save? But what Samuel doesn't know is that someone else is hunting for this little girl, and they'll kill anyone who gets in their way. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The silence of the Montana wilderness had become Samuel Creek's closest companion over the past 3 years. It filled the spaces where his daughter Emma's laughter used to echo, wrapped around him like a familiar blanket during the long winter evenings, and whispered through the pine needles when the wind picked up just before dawn. At 58, Samuel had grown accustomed to this solitude, had even come to prefer it over the well-meaning condolences and pitying glances that followed him through town during those first terrible months after Emma's death. His cabin sat, tucked into a grove of towering ponderosa pines, 15 miles from the nearest neighbor and 30 from Clearwater Falls, the small mountain town where he occasionally went for supplies. The structure was solid, built by his own hands 25 years ago when Emma was just a toddler and his wife Sarah was still alive. Back then, the isolation had been a choice, a way to raise their daughter close to nature, away from the complications of modern life. Now it felt more like a fortress against memories he couldn't bear to face. The morning light filtered through frost-covered windows as Samuel prepared his usual breakfast of black coffee and sourdough bread. His movements were economical, practiced, every gesture honed by years of living alone. The small silver locket lay on the wooden table beside his plate, catching the pale sunlight. Inside was a photograph of Emma at 16, her dark hair braided the way Sarah used to wear hers, her smile bright with the confidence of youth. Samuel touched the locket gently, a ritual he performed each morning and evening, as if the metal could somehow bridge the gap between the living and the dead. Emma had been everything to him after Sarah's passing from cancer when Emma was 12. Father and daughter had grown even closer in their shared grief, spending long days tracking deer through the forest, fishing the clear mountain streams, and sitting by the fire while Samuel taught her the old skills his own father had passed down, how to read weather patterns in the clouds, how to move silently through underbrush, how to find your way home when the familiar landmarks disappeared under snow. "Dad, you worry too much," she'd said the morning she left for what would be her final journey into the mountains. That was 3 years ago, when the first search party had organized to look for a missing 8-year-old girl named Lucy Morrison. The child had vanished during a family camping trip near Glacier Ridge, and despite the efforts of park rangers and volunteers, no trace had been found after a week of searching. Emma had been determined to help. At 19, she possessed all the wilderness skills Samuel had taught her, plus the fearless optimism of youth that made her believe she could succeed where others had failed. The hand-drawn map she'd sketched that morning still hung on Samuel's wall, a crude but accurate representation of the search area, with notations in her careful handwriting marking dangerous ravines, potential shelter spots and water sources. She'd planned her route methodically the way he'd taught her. But something had gone wrong in those unforgiving mountains. The rescue team found Emma's body 4 days later, at the bottom of Hidden Creek Gorge. She'd fallen during a sudden blizzard while following what appeared to be tracks, possibly the missing girls. The coroner said she'd died instantly, which Samuel supposed was meant to be a comfort. Though comfort seemed impossible in those dark days that followed, the missing girl, Lucy Morrison, was never found. The official search was called off after 2 weeks, though several local volunteers continued looking on their own for months afterward. Eventually, even they gave up. The mountains had claimed 2 lives instead of giving back 1, and the Morrison family moved away shortly after, unable to bear the constant reminder of their loss. Samuel had retreated to his cabin after the funeral and stayed there. Friends from town had visited at first. Old hunting partners, fellow members of the volunteer fire department, even Pastor Williams from the little church where Samuel and Emma had occasionally attended services. But Samuel's grief was a wall none of them could scale, and eventually they stopped coming. He let his membership in the fire department lapse, stopped answering his phone, and made his increasingly rare trips to town as brief and impersonal as possible. The isolation suited him, or so he told himself. He had his routines, checking his trap lines, maintaining the cabin, splitting firewood, reading by lamplight in the evenings. His needs were simple: food, shelter, and enough physical labor to exhaust his body, so his mind wouldn't have time to wander down the dark paths of what if and if only. He ordered supplies through old Pete Garrison, who ran a small delivery service and was content to leave boxes at the gate to Samuel's property without expecting conversation. But on this particular morning, as snow began to fall in fat, lazy flakes outside his window, Samuel's carefully constructed routine was about to be shattered. He was reaching for his heavy winter coat when he heard it, a sound so faint he almost dismissed it as wind through the trees. But then it came again, and his blood turned cold. It was crying, a child's crying, thin and desperate, carrying on the morning air. Samuel stepped onto his porch, his breath forming white clouds in the frigid air. The sound was coming from the direction of the old logging trail that ran past his property, about 200 yards through the trees. Every instinct told him to go inside, to close the door, and let someone else deal with whatever tragedy was unfolding out there. He'd had his fill of other people's emergencies, of playing hero only to fail when it mattered most. But the crying continued, and despite himself, Samuel found his feet carrying him down the porch steps and into the snow. His boots crunched through the thin crust that had formed overnight, and he moved with the quiet efficiency of a man who'd spent his life in these woods. The crying grew louder as he approached, and through a gap in the trees he saw her. A small girl, no more than 8 or 9 years old, sat huddled against the trunk of a massive pine tree. She wore a thin pink jacket that was completely inadequate for the weather, and her dark hair hung in tangled strands around her face. Her feet, barely covered by worn sneakers, were already showing the early signs of frostbite. She looked up at Samuel's approach with eyes that held a mixture of hope and terror. For a moment, Samuel couldn't move. The scene was too familiar, too much like the nightmares that still woke him in the early hours of the morning. But this was real, a flesh and blood child who would die if he didn't act. Whatever his personal demons, he couldn't let that happen. "Hey there," he said softly, crouching down several feet away so he wouldn't seem threatening. "What's your name, sweetheart?" The girl's eyes were wide with shock and exhaustion. Her lips were blue with cold, and she was shivering so violently she could barely speak. I'm Lucy," she whispered. The name hit Samuel like a physical blow. Lucy Morrison, the girl Emma had died trying to save. Samuel's hand went instinctively to the locket in his jacket pocket, his fingers finding the familiar weight of it. 3 years ago, this child had vanished into these same mountains. 3 years ago, Emma had followed her trail into the wilderness and never come home. Now, impossibly, she was here again, as if fate had decided to offer Samuel a chance at redemption, or perhaps a more cruel test than he'd yet endured. He forced his voice to remain steady. "Lucy, I'm Samuel. I'm going to help you, okay? But first, I need to get you somewhere warm." Without waiting for a response, Samuel shrugged out of his heavy winter coat and wrapped it around the girl's tiny frame. She was so small, she almost disappeared inside it, but he could already see some color returning to her lips. He scooped her up in his arms, surprised by how light she was, and began the walk back to his cabin. As he carried her through the trees, Samuel's mind raced with questions. Where had she been for 3 years? How had she survived? Why was she here now, in the same mountains where Emma had died looking for her? And perhaps most importantly, was someone looking for her? Someone who might not want her found? The weight of the child in his arms felt both familiar and foreign. It had been years since he'd held anyone, years since he'd been responsible for another human being's welfare. The sensation awakened something in him he'd thought was dead, a protective instinct that had once defined him as a father. Back at the cabin, Samuel set Lucy down near the fireplace and quickly built up the fire until it was blazing. He wrapped her in blankets and made her hot cocoa, watching as she sipped it with hands that still trembled from cold and shock. The warm light played across her face, and Samuel could see she was indeed the same child from the missing person posters that had been plastered all over Clearwater Falls 3 years ago. Older now, changed by whatever ordeal she'd endured, but unmistakably Lucy Morrison. As the immediate crisis of hypothermia passed, Samuel found himself studying the girl more closely. There were small scars on her hands and arms, and her eyes held a wariness that spoke of hard experiences. She kept glancing toward the windows, as if expecting someone to appear, and she flinched whenever Samuel moved too quickly. "Lucy," he said gently, settling into the chair across from her, "can you tell me how you got here?" "Where have you been?" The girl's eyes filled with tears, and she shook her head. "I can't remember everything," she whispered. "There was a man, and a place with high walls. I think I ran away, but I don't know how long I was walking. I just kept walking until I couldn't anymore." Samuel felt a chill that had nothing to do with the weather. The fragmented nature of her memories, the fear in her voice, the scars, it all pointed to something far worse than a simple case of a lost child. Someone had taken Lucy Morrison 3 years ago, and someone might very well be looking for her now. He thought of Emma's hand-drawn map still hanging on his wall, of the careful notations she'd made about safe routes and dangerous areas. His daughter had been trying to bring this child home when she died. Now, through some twist of fate, Samuel had been given the chance to finish what Emma had started. The decision formed in his mind with surprising clarity. He would take Lucy to safety, would deliver her back to civilization and whatever remained of her family. It was what Emma would have wanted, what she had literally died trying to do. And maybe, just maybe, he could find some measure of peace in completing her mission. But as Samuel looked at the fear in Lucy's eyes and remembered the way she kept watching the windows, he realized this wasn't going to be as simple as walking her to town. Something had happened to this child, something that might make the journey far more dangerous than he'd initially imagined. Still, the path forward was clear. For the first time in 3 years, Samuel Creek had a purpose beyond merely surviving each day. He had someone to protect, someone to bring home safely. The irony wasn't lost on him. The same child whose disappearance had led to his daughter's death might now be the key to his redemption. Outside, the snow continued to fall, and somewhere in the distance, Samuel thought he heard the sound of engines, snowmobiles perhaps, or all-terrain vehicles. The sound made Lucy shrink deeper into her blankets, and Samuel's jaw tightened with grim determination. Whatever was coming, he would be ready. The sound of engines grew closer as Samuel helped Lucy into dry clothes he'd found in an old storage box, clothes that had once belonged to Emma. The pink sweater was too big for Lucy's small frame, but it was warm and dry, which was all that mattered now. As he rolled up the sleeves, Samuel noticed something that made his breath catch in his throat. Attached to Lucy's belt, barely visible beneath her torn jacket, was a small piece of blue fabric, a ribbon, faded but unmistakable. Samuel had seen that exact shade of blue before, in the evidence photos the sheriff had shown him 3 years ago. It was from Lucy's original outfit, the one she'd been wearing when she first disappeared during that family camping trip. "Lucy," Samuel said carefully, his voice barely above a whisper, "this ribbon on your belt. Have you been wearing it this whole time?" The girl looked down and touched the fabric with trembling fingers. "I think so. Sometimes I dream about it. A lady told me to never let go of it, that it would help people find me. Her voice was distant, as if she was trying to grasp memories that kept slipping away. Samuel's hands stilled on the sweater sleeves. This was the same child, the same Lucy Morrison, who had vanished 3 years ago, whose disappearance had set in motion the chain of events that led to Emma's death. But if she'd been missing all this time, where had she been? And why was she here now, alone in the wilderness again? The engines outside were definitely closer now, and Samuel moved to the window, staying back from the glass as he peered through the curtains. 3 snowmobiles were moving along the logging trail, their riders bundled in dark winter gear. They weren't moving like recreational riders or even search and rescue teams. Their formation was tactical, methodical, like hunters tracking prey. "Lucy, I need you to listen to me very carefully," Samuel said, turning back to the girl. "Those people outside, do you recognize the sound of their machines?" The color drained from Lucy's face, and she began shaking again, but not from cold this time. "They found me," she whispered. "I thought I got away, but they found me." "Who found you, sweetheart?" "Who are they?" Lucy's eyes darted toward the window, then back to Samuel. "The bad men. The ones who took me before. They said if I ever tried to leave again, they'd hurt people. They said they'd hurt anyone who tried to help me." Samuel felt a cold rage building in his chest, not the wild, destructive anger he'd carried for 3 years, but something more focused and dangerous. These men, whoever they were, had taken a 5-year-old child and held her captive for 3 years. They had been the reason Emma had gone into those mountains. They were responsible for his daughter's death. The snowmobiles had stopped somewhere nearby, close enough that Samuel could hear voices carried on the wind, though he couldn't make out the words. He moved quickly to a cabinet near the back door and retrieved an old hunting rifle, checking to ensure it was loaded. "Samuel?" Lucy's voice was small and frightened. "Are you going to give me back to them?" The question hit him like a physical blow. Samuel knelt beside her chair, setting the rifle aside and taking her small hands in his weathered ones. "No, Lucy, I promise you I will not let them take you. But I need you to be very brave right now, okay? We might have to leave here quickly," Lucy nodded. And Samuel saw something in her eyes that reminded him painfully of Emma. A quiet courage that shouldn't have had to exist in someone so young. Samuel moved through his cabin with practiced efficiency, gathering supplies into a large backpack. Food, first aid kit, matches, extra ammunition, warm clothes. As he packed, his mind raced through possibilities. The snowmobiles would give the men an advantage on open ground, but in the deep forest, they'd have to proceed on foot. Samuel knew these mountains better than anyone. Every trail, every shelter, every shortcut Emma had marked on her map. Emma's map. Samuel looked up at the wall where it still hung, her careful pencil marks outlining safe routes and marking dangerous areas. She had been planning to use the old mining trails that crisscrossed the mountains, paths that were treacherous but would be invisible to anyone who didn't know exactly where to look. "Lucy, I'm going to get you somewhere safe, but it means we have to take a long walk through the mountains. Are you strong enough for that?" "I think so," she said, though her voice was uncertain. "I walked for a really long time to get here. My feet hurt, but I kept walking because I knew I had to get away." Samuel found a pair of Emma's old hiking boots in the closet. They were too big for Lucy, but with extra socks, they would provide much better protection than the sneakers she'd been wearing. As he helped her put them on, Lucy spoke again. "Samuel, the lady who told me about the ribbon, I think maybe she was trying to help me before. She had dark hair like mine, and she seemed sad about something." Samuel's hands froze on the bootlaces. "What did she look like, Lucy? Can you remember?" "She was pretty and not very old. She had kind eyes. She told me her name was Emma, and that her daddy was looking for me too." The world seemed to tilt around Samuel. Emma had found Lucy. Somehow, during those final days, his daughter had managed to locate the missing girl. But something had gone wrong. Terribly wrong. The men who had taken Lucy must have found them, and in the chaos that followed, Emma had fallen into the gorge while Lucy was taken back to captivity. "Lucy," Samuel's voice was thick with emotion. What happened after you met Emma? Can you remember? It's fuzzy, Lucy said, screwing up her face with concentration. There were loud voices, and Emma told me to run. She gave me this ribbon and said to keep it no matter what, that it would help good people find me. Then there was a lot of shouting, and I got scared and hid. When I came out, Emma was gone. Samuel closed his eyes, finally understanding what had happened 3 years ago. Emma hadn't simply fallen during a search. She had found Lucy and tried to rescue her, only to be confronted by her captors. In the struggle that followed, Emma had sacrificed herself to give Lucy a chance to escape, pressing the ribbon into her hands as a clue for future rescuers. But Lucy hadn't escaped. Not really. She'd been recaptured and held for 3 more years until she'd somehow managed to break free again. And now she was here in Samuel's cabin, with the proof of Emma's heroism tied to her belt. The voices outside were getting closer, and Samuel could make out individual words now. Check the cabin. She came this way. Find the girl. Samuel shouldered the backpack and picked up the rifle. Lucy, we're going to go out the back door very quietly. I want you to stay right behind me and step exactly where I step, okay? Lucy nodded, her small face set with determination that broke Samuel's heart. She was just 8 years old, but she'd already survived more than most adults ever would. Samuel eased open the back door, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The snow was still falling, which would help cover their tracks, but also make the journey more difficult. He could hear the men at his front door now, voices raised in frustration when they found it locked. "Now," Samuel whispered, and they slipped out into the snow, moving as quietly as possible. Samuel led Lucy toward the dense stand of pines that bordered his property. Behind them, he heard the sound of breaking glass. The men were forcing their way into his cabin. They'd find it empty, but they'd also find signs that Lucy had been there. The hunt would begin in earnest. Samuel's hand found the locket in his pocket, and for the first time in 3 years, he felt connected to his daughter's spirit. Emma had tried to save this child and had given her own life in the attempt. Now it was Samuel's turn to finish what she'd started. As they reached the tree line, Lucy stumbled in the oversized boots, and Samuel caught her arm gently. "It's okay, sweetheart. We're going to take this one step at a time. Where are we going?" she asked, looking back toward the cabin where angry voices were now clearly audible. Samuel looked ahead toward the mountains, toward the treacherous paths Emma had mapped out 3 years ago. "We're going to bring you home, Lucy, just like Emma wanted to do." Behind them, the voices grew louder and more urgent. The men had found the warm cocoa mug, the blankets, the signs of recent occupancy. Soon, they would find the tracks leading toward the forest, and the real chase would begin. But Samuel Creek was no longer the broken, grieving man who had hidden in his cabin for 3 years. He was a father again, with a child to protect and a promise to keep to his daughter's memory. The mountains ahead were dangerous, filled with the same perils that had claimed Emma's life. But Samuel knew them better than anyone alive. The hunt was on, but this time, Samuel wouldn't be the prey. Samuel's survival journal had been a constant companion for the past 3 years, documenting weather patterns, animal behavior, and the subtle changes that marked the passage of seasons in the mountains. Now, as he and Lucy made their way through the dense pine forest, he found himself mentally cataloging new observations. The girl's breathing rate, how she favored her left foot slightly, the way she instinctively moved toward cover when they heard distant sounds. The journal was tucked securely in his pack, its worn leather cover soft from years of handling. Inside were detailed notes about safe routes, water sources, and shelter locations throughout the wilderness. More importantly, it now contained Samuel's growing observations about their pursuers and Lucy's condition. They had been walking for 2 hours when Samuel called for their first rest. Lucy was breathing hard, but hadn't complained once, showing a resilience that impressed him. He helped her sit on a fallen log and offered her water from his canteen. "How are you holding up, sweetheart?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "My feet are getting warm," she said, wiggling her toes in Emma's boots. "These are good boots. Did they belong to Emma?" Samuel nodded, surprised by the directness of her question. Yes, Emma loved hiking in these mountains. She would have wanted someone who needed them to wear them. Lucy was quiet for a moment, then looked up at Samuel with those serious, dark eyes. I'm sorry Emma died trying to help me. It's my fault. The words hit Samuel like a punch to the chest. He knelt beside the log, bringing himself to Lucy's eye level. Lucy, listen to me very carefully. Emma's death was not your fault. The only people responsible are the bad men who took you in the first place. But if I hadn't gotten lost, you were 5 years old, Samuel interrupted gently. 5-year-olds aren't responsible for the evil things adults do to them. Emma chose to help you because that's the kind of person she was. She would never want you to carry guilt that isn't yours. Lucy considered this, then nodded slowly. Samuel could see she didn't fully believe him yet, but the seed was planted. Healing from that kind of misplaced guilt would take time. As they resumed walking, Samuel began teaching Lucy basic wilderness skills, the same lessons he'd once shared with Emma. See how the snow is disturbed there, he said, pointing to a subtle depression near a cluster of rocks. That's where deer bedded down last night. They choose spots that are protected from wind and give them a clear view of approaching danger, like we're doing. Lucy asked. Exactly like we're doing. Samuel was pleased by her quick understanding. In the wilderness, observation can mean the difference between life and death. Emma understood that. They moved steadily upward, following a game trail that wound through stands of aspen and pine. Samuel chose their route carefully, avoiding open meadows where they might be visible from a distance, staying in areas where the canopy would hide them from any aerial surveillance. He doubted their pursuers had access to helicopters, but he hadn't survived this long by taking unnecessary chances. The snow continued to fall, creating a muffled silence that was both blessing and curse. It would help cover their tracks, but it also made it harder to hear approaching danger. Samuel found himself pausing frequently, listening for any sound that didn't belong. The distant buzz of snowmobile engines, voices carried on the wind, the snap of twigs under heavy boots. During one such pause, Lucy tugged at his jacket. "Samuel, I hear something." Samuel froze, straining his ears. At first, he heard only the whisper of snow through pine needles. But then it came, the distant sound of engines. Still miles away, but definitely following their general direction. Good. Ears, he told Lucy. That's exactly the kind of awareness that will keep us safe. Samuel pulled out his journal and made a quick note. 11:30 a.m. Pursuit vehicles approximately 3 to 4 miles south, moving along logging roads. Girl shows excellent natural awareness. He tucked the journal away and adjusted their course slightly, angling toward more difficult terrain where motorized vehicles couldn't follow. They climbed steadily for another hour, and Samuel was impressed by Lucy's endurance. Whatever she'd endured during her captivity, it hadn't broken her physically. If anything, she seemed to have developed the lean toughness of someone who'd learned to survive on limited resources. "Lucy," he said during their next rest, "can you tell me anything about where you've been these past 3 years? It might help me keep us safe." She was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. It was a big house, but not a nice one. There were bars on the windows, and we weren't allowed to go outside. There were other kids there too, but they came and went. I was there the longest. Samuel's jaw tightened. The picture she was painting suggested something far more organized and sinister than a simple kidnapping. "Did the men ever say why they kept you there?" "Sometimes they talked on phones about my daddy. They said he had something they wanted, and as long as they had me, he would do what they said." Lucy looked up at Samuel with those two old eyes. "But my daddy never came to get me." "Maybe he didn't want to do what they said." Samuel's heart ached for her. In her child's logic, she'd concluded that her father had chosen to abandon her rather than face the terrible truth that her captors had probably told her family. "She was dead years ago. I think your daddy never stopped." "Looking for you," Samuel said carefully. "Sometimes bad people lie to children about their families. Sometimes parents are searching when kids think they've been forgotten." They encountered their first major obstacle as they approached Bear Creek, which ran swift and cold down from the high peaks. The water was too deep and fast to wade across safely, especially with Lucy's shorter legs, and the temperature would make any immersion potentially fatal. Samuel studied the creek, remembering this same crossing from years past. There was a fallen tree about 50 yards upstream that might serve as a bridge, but it would be slippery with ice and dangerous if either of them fell. "We need to cross here," he told Lucy. "There's a log upstream that we can walk across, but it's going to be tricky. I'll go first and help you." Lucy looked at the rushing water and swallowed hard, but nodded. "Okay." Samuel made another entry in his mental notes. Girl shows fear, but doesn't let it paralyze her. Follows instructions well. Trust building successfully. The fallen tree was indeed treacherous, coated with a thin layer of ice that made each step precarious. Samuel crossed first, using his rifle as a balance pole, then returned halfway to help Lucy. She moved carefully, placing each foot exactly where he indicated, her small hands gripping his with surprising strength. They were 3/4 across when Lucy's foot slipped. She started to fall backward toward the frigid water, but Samuel caught her arm and pulled her against him. "I've got you," he said firmly. "You're safe." For a moment she clung to him, and Samuel felt something shift inside his chest. It had been so long since anyone had needed his protection, since he'd been responsible for another person's safety. The weight of it was both terrifying and oddly comforting. Once across the creek, they took shelter in a small grove of pines to warm up and eat. Samuel shared trail mix and jerky from his pack, while Lucy told him more about her escape. "I waited until they were all drinking," she said. "They do that sometimes at night, and they get loud and forget to check on us kids as much. There was a loose board in my room that I'd been working on for months. When I finally got it free, I could squeeze through the window." "That was very smart," Samuel said, genuinely impressed. "How long did you walk before you found my cabin?" "I don't know. Maybe 2 days. I slept under trees and ate snow when I got thirsty. I was so cold, but I knew if I stopped moving, they might catch up." Samuel pulled out his journal and made a detailed entry about Lucy's escape, her route, and the location of the house where she'd been held. This information might be crucial if they survived to report it to authorities. As they prepared to resume their journey, Lucy asked, "Samuel, do you think Emma would be proud of me for getting away?" Samuel looked down at this brave little girl who'd endured 3 years of captivity and still had the courage to trust a stranger, and felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Lucy, I think Emma would be amazed by how strong and brave you are." "I know I am." Behind them, the sound of engines was getting closer, but Samuel no longer felt the paralyzing grief that had defined the past 3 years. He had a purpose now, a mission that connected him to his daughter's memory in a way that honored rather than haunted. The mountains ahead were dangerous, but they were also home, and Samuel Creek was bringing his daughter's work to completion, one careful step at a time. Emma's brass compass had been Samuel's 16th birthday gift to his daughter, engraved with the simple inscription, "Find your way home." Now, as he held the familiar weight of it in his palm, the irony cut deep. The compass had failed Emma during her final journey, its needle pointing steadily north while she fell to her death in Hidden Creek Gorge. But today, it would guide Samuel and Lucy to safety if he could overcome the superstitious dread that had kept it buried in his drawer for 3 years. The creek crossing had cost them precious time, and the sound of their pursuers was growing steadily closer. Samuel estimated they had perhaps an hour's lead, maybe less, if the men knew the terrain well enough to predict their route. As they climbed through a dense stand of lodgepole pines, Samuel made a decision that went against every protective instinct he'd developed over the past 3 years. "Lucy, we need to move faster, and that means I'm going to trust you with something very important." He stopped and pulled the compass from his pack, feeling the familiar ache as his fingers traced the worn, brass surface. "This belonged to Emma. If we get separated for any reason, this will help you find your way to safety." Lucy accepted the compass with the reverence of someone who understood she was being given something precious. "It's beautiful." "Did Emma use it a lot?" "Every time we went hiking together. She had a natural sense of direction, but she always carried this as backup. Samuel showed Lucy how to read the compass, how to find true north, and use landmarks to navigate. The town of Clearwater Falls is northeast of here, about 15 miles. If something happens to me, you follow this needle and keep the sun to your left in the morning, your right in the afternoon. Lucy nodded solemnly, tucking the compass safely into her jacket pocket. Nothing's going to happen to you, though, right? I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we both get home safely, Samuel said, which wasn't quite the same thing as a promise, but it was the most honest answer he could give. They resumed climbing, following a switchback trail that Samuel remembered from countless hunting trips with Emma. The path was treacherous in places, requiring careful foot placement on loose shale and icy rocks. But it would take them to higher ground where they could better assess their situation. As they walked, Lucy surprised Samuel by asking about Emma's childhood. What was she like when she was my age? Curious about everything, Samuel said, grateful for the distraction from listening for pursuit. She collected rocks and feathers, always bringing home some treasure she'd found in the woods. She built elaborate fairy houses out of twigs and moss, convinced that magical creatures lived in the forest. Did you believe in them too? Samuel smiled at the memory. I believed in whatever made Emma happy. Sometimes that meant searching for fairy doors in hollow trees, or leaving offerings of honey and berries for the forest spirits. Lucy was quiet for a moment. I used to pretend there were good spirits watching over me in that house. When things got really scary, I'd imagine Emma was there, telling me to be brave. The simple statement hit Samuel with unexpected force. During her captivity, Lucy had created an imaginary Emma to give her strength. His daughter's memory had been a source of comfort for this child even before they'd met. Emma would have liked that, he said softly. She would have been honored to be your protector, even in imagination. They reached a rocky outcropping that provided a clear view of the valley below, and Samuel's heart sank. 3 snowmobiles were visible on the logging road, moving methodically in their direction. The riders had dismounted and appeared to be examining tracks in the snow, probably the point where Samuel and Lucy had left the road for the forest. Samuel pulled out a pair of compact binoculars and studied the men more closely. They wore military-style winter gear and moved with professional precision. These weren't random criminals or opportunistic kidnappers. These were professionals, possibly former military or private security contractors. What do you see? Lucy asked, staying low as Samuel had taught her. 3 men, well-equipped, probably with wilderness training. Samuel lowered the binoculars and considered their options. The men would soon discover their trail and begin following on foot, and they had the advantage of numbers and superior equipment. Lucy, I need to ask you something important. In the house where they kept you, did you ever hear names or see papers with writing on them? Lucy screwed up her face in concentration. There was a man they called Mr. Hendricks. He was mean, but he was in charge. And sometimes they talked about someone named Morrison. They said he was being difficult about the land deal. Morrison. Lucy's last name was Morrison. Samuel felt pieces of a puzzle beginning to fall into place. This wasn't just about a kidnapped child. It was about coercion, using Lucy to force her father into some kind of business arrangement. Lucy, what kind of work did your daddy do? Before you were taken, I mean. He had a big office with lots of papers. People came to him when they wanted to buy land or build houses. Mommy said he helped decide what could be built where. Lucy's voice grew smaller. Sometimes he had to work late because people didn't like his decisions. Samuel nodded grimly. A land development official who'd been coerced for 3 years through his daughter's kidnapping. The scope of the conspiracy was becoming clearer, and it explained why these men were so determined to recapture Lucy. She wasn't just a victim, she was evidence of an ongoing criminal enterprise. We need to move, Samuel said, shouldering his pack. They'll be following our trail within the hour. As they continued climbing, Samuel found himself drawing on skills he'd learned decades ago during his brief stint in the Army Reserve. Reading terrain, planning escape routes, thinking tactically about pursuit and evasion. It was knowledge he'd hoped never to need again, but Lucy's life might depend on it. The trail led them through a series of natural stone formations that would provide cover and confuse their trail. Samuel showed Lucy how to step on rocks instead of snow when possible, how to brush away footprints with pine branches, how to use the terrain to break up their silhouette when moving across open ground. "You're really good at this," Lucy observed as Samuel erased signs of their passage with practiced efficiency. "Emma and I used to play tracking games in these mountains," Samuel said. "She got so good she could follow a deer trail that was hours old. I learned a lot from her." They took shelter in a small cave as afternoon shadows grew longer, sharing jerky and water while Samuel studied Emma's compass and considered their options. The main trail to Clearwater Falls would be the obvious route, which meant their pursuers would likely try to intercept them there. But there were other ways, older trails, mining roads from the 1800s that didn't appear on modern maps. "Samuel," Lucy said quietly, "what if we don't make it? What if they catch us?" The question hung in the cold air between them. Samuel could have offered false reassurance, but Lucy deserved honesty. She'd already survived more than most adults could endure. "If they catch us, I'll do everything I can to make sure you get away." "You're smart and brave, Lucy. If you have to, you can survive on your own until you reach help." Lucy studied Emma's compass in her hands. "Emma didn't make it when she tried to save me." "No, she didn't. But Emma succeeded in the most important way. She made sure you survived. She gave you the tools you needed to eventually escape and find help. Sometimes that's all we can do, give someone else a chance, even if we can't guarantee the outcome." As darkness approached, Samuel made the decision to travel by night. It was more dangerous, but it would give them the advantage of concealment. Their pursuers would likely make camp and wait for daylight. Assuming that a middle-aged man and a young girl wouldn't risk traveling in darkness, they moved out under a canopy of stars, Emma's compass glowing faintly in Samuel's hand as he checked their bearing. Lucy stayed close behind him, her footsteps nearly silent on the snow-covered trail. She was learning quickly, adapting to the wilderness with an instinct that reminded Samuel painfully of Emma at that age. "Where exactly are we going?" Lucy asked as they navigated around a fallen tree. "There's an old mining cabin about 6 miles northeast of here. If it's still standing, it'll give us shelter and put us within striking distance of the main road to town." Samuel paused to check the compass again. "From there we can reach help. And then what happens?" Samuel considered the question. "Then we make sure the bad men who took you can never hurt another child. And we make sure your father knows you're alive and safe." Lucy was quiet for a long moment. "Do you think he still loves me?" After all this time, the broken hope in her voice nearly undid Samuel. "Lucy, there's not a day that's gone by that your father hasn't thought about you. Parents don't stop loving their children, no matter what happens or how much time passes." Behind them, far down the mountain, Samuel caught a brief glimpse of flashlight beams moving through the trees. Their pursuers were indeed following, pushing through the darkness with determination that spoke to the high stakes involved. But Samuel Creek was no longer the broken hermit who had hidden from the world for 3 years. He was a father again, protecting a child who carried his daughter's memory in her heart. And with Emma's compass to guide them and her spirit watching over them, they would find their way home. The threatening note was pinned to a tree directly in their path, impossible to miss in the pale morning light. Samuel spotted it from 30 yards away, a stark white rectangle against the dark bark of an ancient pine, positioned exactly where anyone following the old mining trail would see it. His blood turned cold as he realized what it meant. Their pursuers hadn't just been following their tracks. They'd been anticipating their route. "Stay back," Samuel told Lucy. But she was already pressed close behind him. Sensing his tension, Samuel approached the note carefully, scanning the surrounding trees for any sign of an ambush. The forest was eerily quiet. No bird songs, no rustle of small animals in the underbrush. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. The note was written in block letters on expensive paper, the kind used in corporate offices. The message was brief and chilling. "Samuel Creek, we know who you are. We know what you lost. Give us the girl and walk away. Or join your daughter in the ground. You have 24 hours. Samuel's hands trembled as he read the words again. These men knew his name, knew about Emma's death. They'd done their research, which meant this was far more than a desperate search for an escaped captive. This was a calculated operation by people with resources and connections. What does it say? Lucy whispered. Samuel folded the note and tucked it into his jacket pocket. Nothing important. Just someone trying to scare us. But Lucy was too intelligent to be fooled by his casual tone. They found us, didn't they? They know where we're going. Samuel knelt beside her, his mind racing through implications and options. If their pursuers could predict their route well enough to plant a note, they might have planned more than psychological warfare. There could be traps ahead, or worse, an ambush waiting at the mining cabin he'd been leading them toward. Lucy, we need to change our plans. These men are better prepared than I thought. He pulled out his map and compass, studying alternative routes while his mind processed what he'd learned. The note writer's casual reference to Emma's death suggested they had access to police reports, maybe even inside information about the original search and rescue operation. That level of access pointed to serious organizational backing, possibly political connections or law enforcement corruption. Are we going to be okay? Lucy asked, her voice steady despite the fear Samuel could see in her eyes. We're going to be smart, Samuel said, which was the most honest answer he could give. These mountains are big, and I know them better than anyone. But we can't underestimate these men anymore. Samuel made the decision to abandon the main trail entirely. Instead of following the established mining road toward the cabin, they would cut through unmarked wilderness, following deer paths and creek beds that wouldn't appear on any map. It would be harder going, especially for Lucy, but it might buy them the element of surprise. As they left the trail and pushed into dense forest, Samuel couldn't shake the feeling that they were being watched. He found himself checking over his shoulder constantly, studying the tree line for any hint of movement or glint of sunlight off binocular lenses. They had been walking for 2 hours when Lucy stumbled and fell to her knees in the snow. Samuel was beside her instantly, checking for injury, but she was simply exhausted. The adrenaline that had carried her through the escape and first day of travel was finally wearing off. "I'm sorry," she gasped, struggling to catch her breath. "I just need a minute." Samuel helped her to a fallen log and gave her water and trail mix. As she rested, he studied her face, noting the dark circles under her eyes and the way her hands shook slightly. She was running on empty, and he'd been pushing too hard. "Lucy, when did you last have a real meal?" "Before you escaped, I mean," she thought about it. "Maybe 2 days? They didn't feed us much the last week. I think they were planning to move us somewhere else." Samuel felt another piece of the puzzle click into place. The men chasing them weren't just trying to recapture Lucy. They were trying to recover her before their entire operation was exposed. Her escape had probably triggered an emergency evacuation of whatever facility had housed her and other children. "How many other kids were there?" he asked gently. "Sometimes more, sometimes less. Maybe 6 or 7 usually. They kept us in different rooms, and we weren't supposed to talk to each other." Lucy's voice grew smaller, "but sometimes we did anyway. There was a boy named Tommy who'd been there almost as long as me." Samuel made a mental note to report everything Lucy told him, assuming they survived to reach authorities they could trust. This wasn't just about one kidnapped child. It was about an ongoing criminal enterprise that had been operating for years. They were preparing to resume walking when Samuel heard it, the distant sound of a helicopter. He grabbed Lucy and pulled her under the shelter of a large pine tree, its branches heavy with snow that would help conceal them from aerial observation. "Don't move," he whispered as the sound grew closer. The helicopter passed overhead, flying a search pattern that suggested they were looking for something specific. Samuel caught a glimpse of it through the branches, a black aircraft with no visible markings, the kind used by private security companies or government agencies operating off the books. After it passed, Samuel sat back against the tree trunk, his mind reeling. A helicopter changed everything. It meant their pursuers had resources he hadn't anticipated, and it made concealment far more critical. But it also suggested that Lucy's testimony represented a serious threat to powerful people, the kind of people who had helicopters at their disposal. "Samuel," Lucy said quietly, "I think I remember something else about the house where they kept me." "What is it?" "There were cars that came at night sometimes. Big black cars with dark windows. And I heard them talking about a judge. They said Judge Morrison would do whatever they wanted as long as they had me." Samuel's breath caught. "Judge Morrison? Lucy, is that your father?" Lucy nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. "He's a judge. He makes decisions about big construction projects and stuff. The bad men said as long as they had me, he would approve anything they wanted to build." The full scope of the conspiracy was becoming clear. Lucy's father wasn't just any official, he was a judge with authority over major development projects. For 3 years, he'd been forced to rubber stamp whatever projects these criminals wanted approved, knowing that his daughter's life hung in the balance. "Lucy, this is very important. Did you ever hear them mention specific projects or places they wanted to build?" She wiped her nose on her sleeve, thinking hard. "There was something about a casino. And they talked about building near water, a lake, I think. They said it was worth millions of dollars." Samuel nodded grimly. "A casino development would require numerous regulatory approvals, environmental clearances, and judicial oversight. With a compromised judge, the criminals could push through projects that would normally face years of legal challenges." The sound of the helicopter was returning, flying a tighter pattern now. Samuel pulled Lucy deeper under the pine boughs and whispered, "We need to move. They're narrowing their search." As they prepared to leave their shelter, Samuel made a decision that would have seemed impossible just days ago. Instead of simply trying to get Lucy to safety, he was going to help her expose the entire conspiracy. Emma had died trying to save this child, and her sacrifice deserved to mean something more than just Lucy's rescue. "Lucy, when we get to town, we're not just going to find your father. We're going to make sure everyone knows what happened to you and the other children. We're going to stop these people from hurting anyone else." Lucy looked up at him with those serious, dark eyes. "Even if it's dangerous? Especially because it's dangerous." That's what Emma would have wanted. Not just to save you, but to make sure you were the last child they could hurt. They set off through the forest, avoiding open areas where the helicopter might spot them. Samuel led them along a creek bed, knowing the running water would help mask their heat signature if the aircraft had thermal imaging equipment. The going was treacherous, with ice-covered rocks and hidden pools that could soak through their boots, but it was their best chance of staying concealed. As they walked, Lucy continued sharing fragments of memory about her captivity. "There was a woman who brought us food sometimes. She seemed sad, and she was nice to us when the men weren't watching. I think maybe she wanted to help, but was scared. Did she ever say anything about trying to help you escape? Once she told me to be ready to run if I ever got the chance. She said there were good people looking for us, and someday someone would come." Lucy looked up at Samuel. "Maybe she meant you." The weight of expectation in those words was almost crushing. Samuel had spent 3 years hiding from responsibility, from connection, from the possibility of failing someone else the way he'd failed Emma. Now, he was responsible not just for Lucy's physical safety, but for her hope that adults could be trusted to protect children. They had been following the creek for an hour when Samuel spotted something that made him freeze. Fresh boot prints in the mud beside the water. Someone had been here recently, and the prints were heading in the same direction they were traveling. Samuel knelt and examined the prints more closely. Military-style boots, size 11 or 12, with aggressive tread patterns designed for difficult terrain. The stride length suggested someone tall and physically fit, probably one of their pursuers who had gotten ahead of them somehow. "What is it?" Lucy whispered. "Someone's been here before us. We need to be very careful now." Samuel drew his rifle and checked that a round was chambered. He'd hoped to avoid any direct confrontation, but these men seemed determined to force one. The threatening note had been psychological warfare, but boot prints meant they were closing in for a more direct approach. They continued along the creek, but now Samuel moved with the careful precision of a hunter, pausing frequently to listen and scan the surrounding forest. Lucy followed his example, stepping only where he stepped. Freezing when he froze, the attack came without warning. A rifle shot cracked through the forest, and bark exploded from a tree inches from Samuel's head. He grabbed Lucy and dove behind a large boulder, his military training taking over as he assessed the situation. "Stay down," he told Lucy, who was pressed against the rock with wide, frightened eyes. Another shot rang out, this one striking the boulder and sending stone chips flying. Samuel could tell from the sound that the shooter was using a high-powered rifle with a scope, positioned somewhere in the trees across the creek. "Samuel Creek," a voice called out from the forest. "You're outgunned and outnumbered. Send the girl out and you can walk away from this." Samuel remained silent, using the time to pinpoint the shooter's location. The voice had come from slightly left of where the shots originated, which meant either multiple shooters or someone trying to confuse him about their position. "We know about your daughter," the voice continued. "We know she died in these mountains trying to play hero. Don't make the same mistake." The mention of Emma sent white-hot rage through Samuel's veins, but he forced himself to think tactically. They wanted him angry and reckless. They wanted him to do something stupid that would give them a clear shot. Instead, Samuel whispered to Lucy, "I'm going to create a distraction. When I tell you to run, you follow the creek downstream as fast as you can. Don't look back and don't stop until you reach the old bridge about half a mile down." "I won't leave you," Lucy whispered back. "Yes, you will. Because that's what Emma would want, for you to be safe. And because I need you to survive, to tell people what happened here." Samuel waited for the right moment, then fired 3 quick shots at the muzzle flash he'd spotted across the creek. As the shooter took cover, Samuel shouted, "Now, Lucy, run!" But as Lucy started to move, Samuel heard something that chilled his blood. Footsteps behind them. They weren't dealing with one sniper. They were surrounded. Emma's last letter had been tucked away in Samuel's pack for 3 years, unread and carefully preserved between 2 pieces of cardboard to protect it from moisture and time. He'd found it in her room after the funeral, sealed in an envelope with his name written in her careful handwriting. For 3 years, he hadn't been able to bring himself to read what might be her final words to him. But now, pinned down behind the boulder with bullets whistling overhead, Samuel felt compelled to know what his daughter had wanted to tell him. The shooting had stopped momentarily, giving Samuel a chance to assess their situation. He could hear at least 2 different voices calling out from the forest, confirming his fear that they were surrounded. Lucy was pressed against him, trembling but trying to be brave. "Why did they stop shooting?" she whispered. "They want us alive," Samuel realized. "At least they want you alive. Dead, you can't tell anyone what you know about their operation." During the lull, Samuel carefully extracted Emma's letter from his pack. The envelope was yellowed with age, and his hands shook as he opened it. Emma's handwriting filled 2 pages, and as he read, tears blurred his vision. "Dad," the letter began, "if you're reading this, something has probably happened to me during the search for Lucy Morrison. I need you to know that I'm not doing this to be reckless or to prove anything. I'm doing it because it's right, and because you taught me that we protect those who can't protect themselves." Samuel's throat tightened as he continued reading. Emma's words revealed a maturity and wisdom that he'd sometimes forgotten in his memories. Of her as his little girl, "I found something today that the other searchers missed, signs. That Lucy didn't just get lost. Someone took her, Dad. There are tire tracks hidden under fresh snow, and I found pieces of rope that don't match any of the camping gear her family brought. The people who took her might still be out there, and they might have her." Samuel's blood ran cold. Emma had figured out that Lucy had been kidnapped, not simply lost. She'd been investigating a crime, not just conducting a search and rescue operation. The letter continued, "I'm going to follow the trail I found. But I wanted to write this first in case something goes wrong. If anything happens to me, I need you to know that I love you more than words can express. You've been the best father a girl could ask for, and everything good about me comes from your example." Lucy noticed Samuel's tears. "Is that from Emma?" Samuel nodded, unable to speak for a moment. He continued reading aloud in a whisper, needing Lucy to hear Emma's words. "Dad, promise me that if I don't come back, you won't blame yourself. Promise me you'll keep living, keep helping people, keep being the man who taught me to stand up for what's right. And if you ever find Lucy Morrison, tell her that someone cared enough about her to risk everything to bring her home." Samuel closed his eyes, finally understanding what Emma had been trying to accomplish. She hadn't just died in an accident during a search. She died investigating a kidnapping, trying to expose the truth about what had happened to Lucy. Samuel Creek. One of the voices called out from across the creek. "We know you're reading something back there. Maybe old family photos? We can wait all day, but that little girl is going to get cold and hungry." Samuel folded the letter carefully and looked at Lucy. "Emma knew," he said quietly. "She knew you'd been taken, not just lost. She was trying to prove it when she died." Lucy's eyes widened. "She was trying to help me even then. She was trying to help you. And she was trying to stop the people who took you from hurting other children." Samuel felt something shift inside him. The crushing weight of guilt he'd carried for 3 years was transforming into something else, purpose, determination. "And now we're going to finish what she started." Samuel studied their position, looking for advantages. The boulder provided good cover from the front, but they were exposed to flanking attacks. However, about 20 yards downstream, he could see the entrance to what looked like a small cave or deep overhang in the creek bank, the kind of shelter that might give them options. "Lucy, I need you to listen very carefully. In a few minutes, I'm going to provide covering fire while we move to that cave downstream. It's going to be loud and scary, but you have to trust me." "Okay," she said, her voice steady despite her fear. "If something happens to me, if I get hurt, you keep going. You follow this creek all the way down to the main road, and you find the first person you can trust. You tell them about Judge Morrison, about the house where they kept you, about everything." Lucy shook her head. "Nothing's going to happen to you. Maybe not. But if it does, you remember that Emma died trying to save you, and I'm willing to risk my life to complete her mission. That's not something to feel guilty about. That's something to honor by staying alive and telling your story." Samuel checked his rifle and prepared for their dash to the cave. As he did, he heard something that made him pause, the sound of the helicopter returning, but this time it was different. The aircraft seemed to be hovering rather than searching, and he could hear men shouting over the rotor noise. "Looks like they're bringing in reinforcements," he muttered. But then Samuel heard something unexpected. Different voices, sharper commands, and what sounded like official radio chatter. A second helicopter was approaching from a different direction. "This is the FBI." A voice boomed through a loudspeaker. "You are surrounded. Lay down your weapons and surrender immediately." Samuel felt a surge of hope. Somehow law enforcement had found them. But his relief was tempered by uncertainty. In a situation this complex, with corruption reaching into the judicial system, how could he know which authorities to trust? The shooting resumed, but now it wasn't directed at Samuel and Lucy. The men who had been hunting them were under attack from the FBI team, creating chaos in the forest around them. "Stay down," Samuel told Lucy as gunfire erupted from multiple directions. Through the noise of the firefight, Samuel heard one of their pursuers shouting into a radio, "The operation is blown!" "Repeat, the operation is blown. We need immediate extraction." The battle lasted only minutes. Professional law enforcement had overwhelming advantages over the criminals, including superior numbers, air support, and tactical coordination. When the shooting stopped, Samuel heard the distinctive sound of helicopters landing nearby. "Lucy Morrison," a woman's voice called out through a megaphone. "This is Agent Sarah Martinez with the FBI. Your father sent us to find you." "You're safe now." Lucy looked up at Samuel with tears in her eyes. "My daddy?" "He really was looking for me." Samuel smiled, feeling a weight lift from his chest that he'd carried for 3 years. "He never stopped looking, sweetheart. And now he knows you're coming home." They emerged from behind the boulder, with their hands visible, Samuel's rifle slung across his back. FBI agents in tactical gear secured the area, while Agent Martinez approached them carefully. "Mr. Creek, I'm Agent Martinez. Judge Morrison has been working with us for months, trying to build a case against the people who took his daughter. Your call to 911 this morning gave us the location we needed to move in." Samuel was confused. "I didn't call 911, Agent Martinez smiled. "Lucy did. She used your satellite communicator while you were sleeping. Very smart girl. She remembered her father's full name and told our dispatcher that Samuel Creek was bringing her home." Samuel looked at Lucy in amazement. "When did you—" "While you were reading Emma's letter," Lucy said. "I saw the communicator in your pack and remembered what you taught me about calling for help. I thought maybe if I called, they could help us both." As FBI agents escorted them toward the waiting helicopters, Lucy slipped her hand into Samuel's. "Will you come with me to see my daddy?" Samuel squeezed her hand gently. "I'd be honored to." For the first time in 3 years, Samuel Creek felt like Emma would be proud of him. The letter in his pocket contained her final wish, that if he ever found Lucy Morrison, he would tell her that someone had cared enough to risk everything to bring her home. "Mission accomplished, Emma. Your father kept his promise." The faded photograph that Lucy pulled from a hidden pocket in her jacket changed everything Samuel thought he knew about the past 3 years. As they sat in the FBI helicopter flying toward Clearwater Falls, Lucy carefully unfolded the small square of paper she'd somehow managed to keep hidden throughout her captivity. "I need to show you something," she said, glancing nervously at Agent Martinez, who was coordinating with ground teams through her headset. "I wasn't supposed to keep this, but I hid it really good." The photograph was creased and worn from handling, but the image was still clear. A formal family portrait showing Lucy as a 5-year-old standing between a distinguished man in a judge's robes and a woman with kind eyes. But it wasn't the family Samuel expected to see. "Lucy," Samuel said carefully, studying the man in the photograph, "this isn't Judge Morrison." Lucy's face crumpled with confusion. "Yes, it is. That's my daddy. That's Judge Robert Morrison." Agent Martinez looked up from her radio, having caught the tail end of their conversation. "Is there a problem?" Samuel held up the photograph. "Agent Martinez, who exactly sent you to find Lucy? What judge have you been working with?" Martinez took the photograph, and her expression darkened immediately. She grabbed her radio. "Control, this is Martinez. I need immediate verification on Judge Robert Morrison, Clearwater County, and run a check on anyone else who might have been using that name in connection with this case." As they waited for a response, Lucy looked between Samuel and Agent Martinez with growing alarm. "What's wrong?" "Where's my daddy?" The radio crackled to life. "Martinez, we have a problem. Judge Robert Morrison died in a car accident 18 months ago. The man we've been working with has been identified as Thomas Hendricks, wanted for racketeering and organized crime connections." Samuel felt the world tilt around him. "Hendricks? Lucy, you mentioned that name before. Mr. Hendricks, the man who was in charge at the house where they kept you." The full scope of the deception was staggering. The criminals hadn't just been coercing a judge, they had been impersonating one. Thomas Hendricks had somehow assumed Judge Morrison's identity after the real judge's death, using Lucy's supposed captivity to legitimize his presence in the legal system while pushing through fraudulent development approvals. "So where's my real daddy?" Lucy whispered, tears beginning to flow. Agent Martinez was already working her radio, coordinating with what sounded like a much larger operation. "Control. We need a full background check on Lucy Morrison's biological father. And I need to know how deep this identity theft goes." Samuel put his arm around Lucy, trying to process the implications. "Lucy, tell me everything you can remember about your real father before you were taken. What did he look like? What kind of work did he really do?" Lucy closed her eyes, concentrating. "He was tall and he had gray hair at the sides. He worked with computers, I think. He had an office with lots of screens, and people called him when their computers broke and—" She paused, a memory surfacing. He was always worried about bad people trying to steal information from computers. Samuel exchanged glances with Agent Martinez, a cybersecurity expert, not a judge, which would explain why they took her, Martinez said grimly. If her father specialized in computer security, he might have discovered their operation accidentally, or they might have needed his skills to hack into government systems. The radio crackled again. Martinez, we've located the real Morrison. David Morrison, cybersecurity consultant, reported his daughter missing 3 years ago, but the case was transferred to federal jurisdiction and then seemed to disappear from the system. Morrison himself has been trying to investigate his daughter's disappearance independently. And the fake judge? Martinez asked. Thomas Hendricks has been operating under Morrison's judicial credentials for 18 months, approving development projects worth over $200 million. The real Judge Morrison's death was ruled accidental, but we're reopening that investigation now. Samuel felt sick. The conspiracy was deeper and more sophisticated than anyone had realized. Hendricks hadn't just been coercing officials, he had been replacing them, creating an entire shadow infrastructure of corruption. Lucy, Samuel said gently, your real father never stopped looking for you. The bad men just made sure you couldn't find each other. Lucy was crying openly now, overwhelmed by the revelation that her father was alive and had been searching for her all along. Where is he? Can I see him? Agent Martinez checked her watch. We're coordinating a reunion now, but first we need to make sure it's safe. This Hendricks organization is bigger than we thought, and there might be more people involved who don't know their operation has been compromised. As the helicopter approached Clearwater Falls, Samuel could see the scope of the law enforcement response below. The small mountain town was crawling with FBI vehicles, and what looked like a mobile command center had been set up in the high school parking lot. Mr. Creek, Agent Martinez said, I need you to understand that you and Lucy are likely still in danger. This organization has been operating for years, and they have resources we're still uncovering. The men who were chasing you were just the tip of the iceberg. Samuel nodded grimly. What do you need from us? Everything Lucy can remember about the house where she was held, everyone she saw or heard, every detail about how the operation worked. And we need everything Emma discovered before she died. The mention of his daughter's name brought a fresh wave of emotion. Emma figured out that Lucy had been kidnapped, not just lost. She was investigating when she died, we know. We found her research notes among the evidence your local sheriff's department collected. Emma Creek was building a case against these people 3 years ago. She was closer to the truth than anyone realized. Samuel pulled Emma's letter from his pocket. She left this. She knew she was investigating something dangerous. Agent Martinez read the letter quickly, her expression growing more serious with each line. Mr. Creek, your daughter wasn't just a victim. She was a witness who died before she could testify. Her death wasn't an accident, it was murder. The word hit Samuel like a physical blow. He'd suspected it, but hearing it stated as fact brought back all the rage and grief he'd been carrying for 3 years. The men who killed Emma are the same ones who've been holding Lucy, Martinez continued. The same organization that's been corrupting the legal system, laundering money through fraudulent development projects, and trafficking children. Lucy looked up at Samuel with those serious dark eyes. Samuel, does this mean Emma died because of me? No, sweetheart. Emma died because she was brave enough to stand up to evil people. She died trying to protect you and other children from monsters. Samuel's voice was steady, but inside he felt a fierce determination building. And now we're going to make sure her sacrifice means something. The helicopter touched down at the command center, and Samuel could see a man pacing anxiously beside one of the FBI vehicles. He was tall with graying hair at the temples, and when he saw Lucy through the helicopter's window, his face transformed with an emotion so raw and powerful it took Samuel's breath away. "Daddy!" Lucy screamed. Pressing herself against the window, David Morrison broke past the FBI agents, trying to maintain perimeter security, and ran toward the helicopter as Lucy burst from the aircraft and into his arms. The reunion was everything Samuel had hoped for, but had never experienced himself. A father and daughter finding each other after years of separation. Love stronger than time and trauma. As Samuel watched them embrace, he felt Emma's presence more strongly than he had since her death. His daughter had died trying to make this moment possible, and somehow, through Lucy's survival and courage, Emma's sacrifice had finally achieved its purpose. But even in the joy of the reunion, Samuel knew their ordeal wasn't over. The Hendricks organization was still out there, and as long as Lucy remained the key witness to their crimes, she would remain in danger. The real battle was just beginning. The hidden cache of evidence that Emma had discovered and concealed before her death lay buried beneath a seemingly innocuous pile of rocks near Hidden Creek Gorge, the same location where her body had been found 3 years earlier. Agent Martinez had been skeptical when Samuel suggested that Emma might have hidden physical evidence. But Lucy's detailed recollection of what Emma had told her during their brief encounter had convinced the FBI to authorize a full excavation. She said the rocks looked like a sleeping bear, Lucy explained as she guided the search team through the forest toward the site. Emma told me that if anything happened to her, smart people would eventually figure out what she'd found, and they'd know where to look. Samuel's heart ached as they approached the gorge. He hadn't been back to this place since the day they'd recovered Emma's body, and every step brought fresh waves of grief and memory. But now, instead of overwhelming despair, he felt something else. Pride in his daughter's intelligence and courage. The rock formation Lucy described was exactly where she'd said it would be, about 50 yards upstream from where Emma had fallen. The pile did indeed resemble a sleeping bear, if viewed from the right angle, and Samuel marveled at his daughter's foresight in choosing such a distinctive landmark. FBI technicians carefully dismantled the rock pile, and within minutes they'd uncovered a waterproof container wrapped in multiple layers of plastic. Inside were documents, photographs, and a detailed journal of Emma's investigation into Lucy's disappearance. Agent Martinez opened the journal with gloved hands, and Samuel read over her shoulder as Emma's familiar handwriting revealed the scope of what she'd uncovered. Day 3 of search, one entry read. Found tire tracks and rope fragments that don't match any equipment from the Morrison family's camping trip. Tracks lead toward private road not shown on park maps. Someone definitely took Lucy. This wasn't a child wandering off. Samuel's throat tightened as he read further. Emma had methodically documented evidence that the official search and rescue teams had either missed or ignored. She'd photographed the tire tracks, collected samples of the rope, and even found cigarette butts with distinctive brand markings. Day 5, another entry continued. Followed private road to gated compound. Large house with high security fence, multiple buildings. Saw children's clothing hanging on laundry line behind main house. Heard children's voices but couldn't get close enough to see faces. This is definitely where they're holding Lucy. Agent Martinez looked up at Samuel. Your daughter found their base of operations 3 years ago. She was building a federal case single-handedly. The journal's final entry was dated the day Emma died. Going back tonight to get photos of the compound and hopefully identify Lucy among the children. Left all evidence at Sleeping Bear Rocks in case something goes wrong. If anyone reads this, the compound is at GPS coordinates followed by precise location data. Tell Dad I love him and that Lucy Morrison is alive. Samuel closed his eyes, overwhelmed by Emma's courage and foresight. Even knowing she was walking into danger, she'd taken precautions to ensure her investigation would survive if she didn't. We've got the GPS coordinates, Agent Martinez said into her radio. Mobilize tactical teams for immediate deployment to the compound location. And get me satellite imagery of that area from 3 years ago through present day. As the FBI coordinated their response, David Morrison approached Samuel. Lucy's father looked older than his years, worn down by 3 years of searching for his daughter while fighting a shadow organization that had assumed his identity. Mr. Creek, I can never repay you for bringing Lucy home, Morrison said, his voice thick with emotion. But I need you to know that Emma's investigation was what gave me hope all these years. The sheriff's department shared her findings with me informally, and it's what convinced me that Lucy was still alive somewhere. Samuel shook Morrison's hand. Emma would be honored to know her work helped you keep believing. There's something else, Morrison continued. Lucy told me about the other children she saw in captivity. My Lucy wasn't their only victim, and from what she's described, they've been expanding their operation over the past 3 years. Agent Martinez rejoined their conversation, her expression grim. Satellite imagery confirms ongoing activity at the compound location. We can see multiple buildings, vehicles, and what appears to be a significant security presence. This is going to require a major tactical operation. What about the children? Samuel asked. If they're still holding kids there, how do you ensure their safety during a raid? That's where we need Lucy's help, Martinez said carefully. She knows the layout of the compound, the routines of the guards, the location of where children are housed. But I won't lie to you. Asking her to relive those memories, even to help other children, is going to be traumatic. Samuel looked across the excavation site where Lucy was sitting with her father, both of them crying and laughing simultaneously as they tried to make up for 3 years of lost time. The idea of asking her to revisit her captivity seemed almost cruel, but Lucy had already proven her courage repeatedly. She'd survived 3 years of imprisonment, engineered her own escape, survived alone in the wilderness, and helped Samuel evade professional kidnappers. If anyone could handle the psychological challenge of helping plan a rescue operation, it was Lucy Morrison. Let me talk to her, Samuel said. She trusts me, and she understands what's at stake for the other children. Samuel approached Lucy and her father carefully, not wanting to interrupt their reunion, but knowing that other children's lives might depend on Lucy's information. Lucy, sweetheart, I need to ask you about something difficult. She looked up at him with those serious eyes that had seen too much. You need me to help save the other kids. Samuel was constantly amazed by her perceptiveness. Yes, but only if you feel strong enough. No one will be angry with you if you're not ready. Lucy looked at her father, who nodded encouragingly. Daddy, will you stay with me while I talk to the FBI people? Every second, Morrison promised. Over the next 2 hours, Lucy provided the FBI with detailed intelligence about the compound where she'd been held. She drew maps of the building layouts, described the guards' schedules, identified which rooms were used to house children, and explained the security measures that had kept them imprisoned. There's a back door that the guards don't watch much during dinner time, she explained, her small finger tracing paths on the tactical maps the FBI had spread across a table. And the kids are usually kept in the basement during the day, but they let us upstairs to eat. Agent Martinez took careful notes. Lucy, do you remember how many other children were there when you escaped? 6, I think. Maybe 7. Tommy was still there. He's been there almost as long as me. And there were some newer kids who were really scared. Samuel felt sick thinking about children who had been in captivity even longer than Lucy. 3 years was an eternity in a child's life. But some of these kids had been prisoners even longer. When will you go get them? Lucy asked Agent Martinez. Tonight. We're coordinating with multiple agencies to ensure we can move quickly and safely. Lucy nodded solemnly. Will Samuel come with you? The question surprised everyone. Agent Martinez looked at Samuel uncertainly. Mr. Creek, you've done more than enough. This is a job for law enforcement professionals now. But Lucy shook her head. The other kids will be scared. They won't trust strangers in uniforms. They need someone who looks like a daddy, someone safe. She looked at Samuel with complete confidence. They need someone like you. Samuel felt the weight of Emma's legacy settling on his shoulders once again. His daughter had died trying to save these children, and now Lucy was asking him to complete the mission. If Agent Martinez thinks it's safe, and if it will help the children, then yes, Samuel said. I'll go. As the sun set over the Montana mountains, Samuel Creek prepared for one final journey into danger. But this time, he wouldn't be running from his past or trying to survive his grief. This time, he would be fighting to honor Emma's memory by bringing lost children home to their families. The real battle was about to begin. Emma's hunting rifle felt both foreign and familiar in Samuel's hands as he crouched in the darkness outside the compound where Lucy had been held for 3 years. The weapon had been his gift to his daughter on her 18th birthday, a rite of passage in their mountain community, and she had treasured it as much for what it represented as for its practical value. Now, 3 years after her death, the rifle would help Samuel complete the mission she had died trying to finish. Agent Martinez checked her watch and spoke quietly into her radio. "All units, we are go in 30 seconds. Remember, children's safety is priority 1. These kids have been traumatized enough." Samuel studied the compound through night vision binoculars, comparing what he saw to Lucy's detailed descriptions. The main house was exactly as she'd described. A large, institutional-looking building surrounded by high fences and floodlights. Security cameras swept predetermined arcs, and armed guards patrolled with military precision. "Movement in the east wing," Samuel whispered into his radio. "Second floor, third window from the left. Looks like a small figure at the window." "Confirmed," came the response from an FBI sniper positioned on the ridge opposite Samuel's location. "Appears to be a child." Samuel's heart clenched. After everything Lucy had told him about the other children's suffering, seeing evidence of their presence made the mission intensely personal. Emma had died trying to reach these kids, and now Samuel had the chance to succeed where she had failed. The FBI tactical team moved with professional silence through the forest surrounding the compound. Samuel stayed with the secondary unit as planned, close enough to help with the children once the building was secured, but not in the initial assault that would be the most dangerous. "Breaching now!" Agent Martinez's voice crackled through the radio. The night exploded into controlled chaos. Flashbang grenades lit up the darkness as tactical teams entered the compound from multiple directions. Samuel heard shouting, the crash of doors being kicked in the sharp commands of FBI agents establishing control. But something was wrong. Control. "This is Alpha Team," a voice reported through the radio static. "Building appears to be mostly empty. Minimal security presence, and we're not finding children in the expected locations." Samuel felt his blood turn cold. "They knew we were coming," he said to the agent beside him. Through his binoculars, Samuel saw movement in a separate building about 100 yards from the main house, a structure that Lucy had described as a garage or storage facility. Muzzle flashes erupted from the windows, and Samuel realized the criminals had consolidated their position in the secondary building, probably with the children as human shields. "Agent Martinez, I've got activity in the garage building. They're firing from inside, and if Lucy's intel is correct, that's where they'd move the kids if they knew a raid was coming." "Copy that. All teams, redirect to secondary structure. Approach with extreme caution. Potential hostages inside." Samuel shouldered Emma's rifle and began moving toward the garage, staying low and using the compound's own security lighting to create shadow corridors for concealment. His military training from decades past came flooding back. How to move silently, how to use terrain for cover, how to think tactically under pressure. As he got closer, Samuel could hear voices from inside the building. Adult voices, angry and desperate, but also something else. The sound of children crying, "Please don't hurt us." A young voice called out, and Samuel's chest tightened with rage. After 3 years of captivity, these children were facing their worst nightmare all over again. Samuel keyed his radio. "Martinez, I can hear children inside. At least 4 or 5 different voices, and they're terrified. Samuel, stay back. Let the tactical team handle this." But Samuel was already moving closer, using his knowledge of Lucy's descriptions to approach from the building's blind spot. She had mentioned a small window on the back wall that was usually kept open for ventilation, a window that might give him eyes inside the building without. Alerting the captors. The window was exactly where Lucy had said it would be, and Samuel carefully peered through the gap. His heart nearly stopped at what he saw. 6 children, ranging in age from perhaps 5 to 12. were huddled together in the center of the room, while three armed men positioned themselves at windows facing the main compound. The children were exactly as Lucy had described them, thin, frightened, wearing clothes that had seen better days. One of the children was a boy who matched Lucy's description of Tommy, the child who had been in captivity nearly as long as she had. The boy was trying to comfort the younger children, even while his own face showed absolute terror. Samuel recognized the tactical situation immediately. The criminals were using the children as human shields while trying to fight their way out of the compound. Any direct assault would put the kids in immediate danger. But waiting gave the captors time to potentially harm their hostages or escape with them. Through the window, Samuel heard one of the men speaking into a radio. "Extraction team needs to be here in 10 minutes or we're going to have to start making this personal." The implication was clear. They would start hurting children to force the FBI to back off. Samuel made a decision that went against every order he'd been given. He couldn't wait for the tactical team to develop a complex plan while children's lives hung in the balance. Emma had died trying to save these kids, and Samuel would not let her sacrifice be in vain. Moving with the silence Emma had taught him during their hunting trips, Samuel worked his way around to a side door that Lucy had mentioned was often left unlocked. The handle turned easily, and Samuel slipped inside the building. The interior was a maze of storage shelves and equipment, providing perfect cover for someone who knew how to move quietly. Samuel could hear the children's frightened whispers and the guards' increasingly agitated radio conversations as he positioned himself behind a stack of crates about 20 feet from where the hostages were being held. "Tommy," Samuel whispered, just loud enough for the boy to hear, but not the guards. The boy's head snapped up, his eyes wide with surprise and hope. "I'm Samuel. Lucy sent me to get you and the other kids out of here. When I give you a signal, I need you to get everyone to lie down as flat as possible. Can you do that?" Tommy nodded slightly, and Samuel saw him subtly position himself to protect the younger children. Samuel raised Emma's rifle and took careful aim at the first guard, who was positioned with his back to Samuel's location. The shot would have to be perfect. Any hesitation or miss would put the children in immediate danger. Emma's rifle spoke with authority, and the first guard dropped silently. Before the other two could react, Samuel had shifted position and taken aim at the second target. "Get down!" he shouted to the children as chaos erupted in the building. Tommy threw himself over the younger kids as Samuel engaged the remaining two guards. Emma's rifle had always been reliable, and it didn't fail him now. Within seconds, the immediate threat to the children was neutralized. "It's okay," Samuel called out gently as he secured the weapons from the fallen guards. "You're safe now. Lucy Morrison sent me to bring you home." At the mention of Lucy's name, several of the children began crying with relief. Tommy helped the others to their feet, and Samuel saw the same resilience in the boy that he'd witnessed in Lucy, the strength that children develop when they have to grow up too fast. "Is Lucy really safe?" Tommy asked, his voice shaking with hope. "She's with her daddy, and she's safe," Samuel confirmed. "And now you're all going to be safe too." Through the radio, Samuel could hear Agent Martinez coordinating the aftermath of the raid. The main compound had been secured, but the real victory was here, in this storage building, where 6 children were finally free after years of captivity. As FBI agents secured the scene and paramedics checked the children for injuries, Samuel held Emma's rifle and felt his daughter's presence more strongly than ever. She had died trying to reach these children, and now they were safe, but Samuel knew the mission wasn't complete yet. The organization that had stolen these children's childhoods was bigger than just this compound, and until everyone involved was brought to justice, none of these families would be truly safe. The original land deed that Lucy had carried, hidden in her jacket's inner lining, was the key to everything, a document that revealed the true scope of Thomas Hendrick's criminal enterprise, and proved that Judge Robert Morrison's death had been no accident. As FBI agents processed the crime scene at the compound, Agent Martinez called Samuel over to examine what Lucy had been protecting all along. She's been carrying this for 3 years without knowing what it was, Martinez said, handling the deed with gloved hands. It's the original legal document for the casino development project, the one that would have required legitimate judicial approval. Samuel studied the deed, noting the forged signatures and altered dates. And Hendricks needed Judge Morrison dead so he could assume his identity and approve the project himself. Not just approve it, he needed Morrison's judicial authority to override environmental protections, Native American treaty rights, and zoning restrictions that would have blocked the development. Martinez pointed to specific clauses in the document. This casino project was worth over $500 million in development contracts. The scale of the conspiracy was staggering. Hendricks hadn't just been running a kidnapping operation. He'd been systematically eliminating obstacles to a massive development scheme, using kidnapped children as leverage against officials who couldn't be bought or replaced. "Lucy," Samuel called out gently. The girl was sitting with Tommy and the other rescued children, all of them wrapped in blankets, while medical personnel checked them over. "Can you come here for a minute, sweetheart?" Lucy approached with her father close behind her. Despite everything she'd endured, she still moved with the quiet courage Samuel had come to admire. "Lucy, this paper you've been carrying, do you remember where you got it?" She thought for a moment. "Emma gave it to me. She said it was very important and that I should hide it and never let the bad men find it. She said someday good people would need to see it." Samuel's throat tightened. Even in her final moments, Emma had been thinking strategically, ensuring that the evidence she'd gathered would survive, even if she didn't. Agent Martinez knelt beside Lucy. "This document is going to help us put all the bad men in prison for a very long time. Emma was very smart to give it to you to keep safe. Will they hurt any more children?" Lucy asked. "Not if we can help it," Martinez promised, but Samuel knew the fight wasn't over. As FBI agents led away the men they'd captured at the compound, his radio crackled with urgent reports from other teams coordinating the larger operation. "Control, this is Team 7. We've got movement at the secondary location, multiple vehicles leaving the casino construction site. Appears to be an attempted evacuation." Samuel grabbed Martinez's arm. "They're running!" "Hendricks and whoever else is involved, they know the operation is blown." Martinez was already coordinating response teams. "All units, we have suspects fleeing toward the highway. Set up roadblocks at mile markers 15 and 23. But Samuel knew these mountains better than any law enforcement officer, and he understood something the FBI might miss. "Agent Martinez, if they're evacuating from the casino site, they're not heading for the highway. They're going for the old mining road that connects to the interstate 40 miles north. It's the only route that wouldn't be monitored." "How can you be sure?" "Because Emma mapped every escape route in these mountains when she was planning her investigation. I know exactly where they're going." Samuel looked at Emma's rifle, still warm in his hands from the recent firefight. The weapon had served its purpose in rescuing the children. But there was one more mission to complete, ensuring that Thomas Hendricks and his organization faced justice for what they'd done to Lucy. "To Emma, and to all the other victims of their conspiracy, I'm going after them," Samuel said. "Absolutely not. This is a federal investigation now, and we have protocols." "Agent Martinez," Samuel interrupted, "your protocols don't include someone who knows these mountains like I do. Those men killed my daughter and held Lucy captive for 3 years. I'm not asking for permission." David Morrison stepped forward. "Agent Martinez, Mr. Creek saved my daughter when your agency couldn't find her for 3 years. If he says he knows where these criminals are going, I believe him." Martinez looked between Samuel and Morrison, then at the rescued children who were living proof of Samuel's commitment to justice. "You go as a civilian consultant only. You follow FBI orders, and you do not engage suspects without backup." Samuel nodded, though they both knew that in the wilderness, backup might be miles away when critical decisions had to be made. "Lucy," Samuel said, kneeling beside her one more time, "I need to go finish something that Emma started. Your daddy and the FBI agents will keep you safe." Lucy threw her arms around Samuel's neck. "Come back safe, okay?" Emma would want you to come back safe. Samuel hugged her tightly, amazed by this child's capacity for love and concern after everything she'd endured. I promise I'll come back, sweetheart. And when I do, all the bad men will be gone for good. As Samuel prepared to leave with the FBI pursuit team, Agent Martinez handed him a radio and GPS unit. Stay in contact at all times. The last thing we need is to lose another good person in these mountains. Samuel took Emma's rifle and headed toward his truck, feeling his daughter's presence guiding him toward the final confrontation. The old mining road would be treacherous in darkness, but Samuel had traveled it dozens of times with Emma during their hunting trips. He knew every turn, every potential ambush point, every place where a desperate criminal might make a stand. Behind him, the rescued children were being loaded into ambulances for transport to the hospital, their long nightmare finally over. But somewhere ahead in the darkness, Thomas Hendricks and his associates were trying to escape justice, carrying with them the secrets of how many other children they'd harmed over the years. Samuel Creek had spent 3 years grieving his daughter's death and questioning whether he could have saved her. Now he had the chance to ensure that Emma's sacrifice had meaning, that her investigation would result in justice for all the victims of Hendricks' organization. The final chase was about to begin. And this time, Samuel wouldn't let the criminals escape into the wilderness that had claimed his daughter's life. This time, he would be the hunter, not the hunted. The new locket rested in Samuel's weathered hands, its silver surface gleaming in the afternoon sunlight that filtered through the windows of the Clearwater Falls courthouse. Inside were 2 photographs, Emma's familiar face smiling up at him from the left side, and Lucy, taken just moments after her reunion with her father, radiating the joy of a child finally safe and home. The Morrison family had presented the locket to Samuel 3 months after the arrests of Thomas Hendricks and his criminal organization, and it had become his most treasured possession. The jury has reached a verdict, announced Judge Patricia Williams, who had been appointed to oversee the corruption cases after the extent of Hendricks' judicial impersonation came to light. Samuel sat in the gallery beside David Morrison and Lucy, watching as the man who had destroyed so many lives was brought forward to hear his fate. Thomas Hendricks looked smaller now, stripped of the false authority he'd wielded for years. The man who had terrorized children and murdered judges bore no resemblance to the powerful figure who had orchestrated a criminal empire worth hundreds of millions of dollars. On the charges of kidnapping, murder, conspiracy, judicial impersonation, and racketeering, we find the defendant guilty on all counts, the jury foreman announced. Samuel felt Lucy's small hand slip into his as the courtroom erupted in quiet celebration. Justice had finally been served, but the victory felt bittersweet. Emma should have been here to see the culmination of her investigation, should have lived to witness the rescue of the children she'd died trying to save. Emma would be so proud of you, Lucy whispered. And Samuel had to blink back tears. The investigation that followed Hendricks's arrest had revealed the full scope of the criminal organization. 17 children had been recovered from various locations, some held for as long as 5 years. The fake casino project had been part of an elaborate money laundering scheme that involved corrupt officials across 3 states. Emma's evidence cache had provided the foundation for prosecutions that would continue for years to come. After the sentencing hearing, Samuel walked with the Morrison family to the small cemetery overlooking Clearwater Falls. Emma's grave was no longer the lonely, grief-stricken place Samuel had avoided for 3 years. Now it was decorated with flowers from the families of rescued children, letters of gratitude from parents across the country, and small tokens left by law enforcement officers who had worked the case. "Hi, Emma," Lucy said softly, kneeling beside the headstone. "I brought you something." She placed a small drawing beside the flowers, a picture of 6 children holding hands under a rainbow, with the words, "Thank you for saving us," written in careful block letters. "All the kids from the house wanted to say thank you," Lucy explained. Tommy is living with his grandparents now, and Maria got to go back to her mom and dad. Everyone is safe because you were brave enough to look for me. Samuel knelt beside Lucy and touched the headstone gently. Emma, sweetheart, your investigation saved 17 children and put away the people who hurt them. The FBI says your evidence was the key to everything. You did it, honey. You saved them all. A gentle breeze stirred the pine trees around the cemetery, and Samuel chose to believe it was Emma, letting him know she'd heard. David Morrison placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. The foundation is ready to make its first grants, he said quietly. The Emma Creek Foundation for Missing Children had been Morrison's idea, funded by the reward money from the Hendricks case and donations from across the country. The foundation would provide resources for families searching for missing children, support for survivors of kidnapping, and funding for wilderness search and rescue training. Emma's investigation techniques are being taught at the FBI Academy now, Morrison continued. Her methods for tracking kidnappers in wilderness environments are going to help save other children. Samuel stood and looked out over the valley where he'd spent his entire life. For 3 years, these mountains had been a place of sorrow and isolation. Now they were home again, filled with purpose and connection to the community he'd abandoned in his grief. Lucy asked me something yesterday, Morrison said. She wants to know if you'd consider being her honorary grandfather. She says she needs someone who knew Emma, someone who understands about being brave in the mountains. Samuel felt his throat tighten with emotion. I'd be honored. As they prepared to leave the cemetery, Lucy tugged on Samuel's jacket. Samuel, will you teach me to track things in the forest like Emma knew how to do? If your father says it's okay, I'd love to teach you everything Emma taught me. Lucy smiled, the first completely carefree smile Samuel had seen from her. And maybe someday I can help find other lost kids too? Samuel looked at this remarkable child who had survived 3 years of captivity and still wanted to help others. And he felt Emma's legacy living on in ways he'd never imagined. Maybe you will, sweetheart. Maybe you will. That evening, Samuel sat on his porch, watching the sun set over the Montana peaks, the new locket warm against his chest. His cabin no longer felt like a refuge from the world, but like a base camp for new adventures. The Morrison family visited regularly, and Lucy had claimed the spare bedroom as her own for weekend stays. When she wanted to practice her wilderness skills, the isolation that had defined Samuel's grief was gone, replaced by the richness of surrogate family, meaningful work with the foundation, and the peace that comes from completing a mission that had been 3 years in the making. Samuel opened the locket and looked at both photographs. His daughter, forever young and brave, and Lucy, alive and safe and full of promise for the future. Emma's sacrifice had meaning now, had saved not just Lucy, but 17 other children and countless future victims who would be protected by the changes her investigation had brought about. Thank you, Emma, Samuel said quietly to the gathering darkness. Thank you for showing me that sometimes the most important thing you can do is refuse to give up on someone, even when everyone else has. A shooting star traced across the Montana sky, and Samuel Creek smiled, finally at peace with his daughter's memory and ready for whatever adventures tomorrow might bring. He was no longer a broken man hiding from the world, but a father figure to a brave little girl, a consultant to law enforcement agencies, and a living testament to the truth that love is stronger than loss, and hope more powerful than grief. The mountain man who had saved the lost girl had found himself in the process, and Emma Creek's legacy lived on in every child who would be protected by the foundation that bore her name. Every family reunited through the techniques she'd pioneered, and every moment of joy Lucy Morrison would experience in the freedom Emma had died to secure. In the end, love had won. It always does.